Hi everybody. Prosper, thank you very much for waking everybody up. I'm Paul Jackson. I'm the outgoing CEO of TUHF. I'm speaking on behalf of three companies. You'll hear them. One is TUHF Limited. One's our Umastandi program, which is our specialized township program. And one is the TUHF Equity Fund, which is our only concessional fund in the group, which really helps entrepreneurs. I think that's a really good point because I want to tell you a little bit about TUHF, but I also want to be a bit controversial, because I think the discussion at the African Union at this conference has missed the massive potential, where the real delivery is. We've talked about all these big projects, Acorn, and they're great, and IHS and stuff. But this is a small amount of the total delivery. I want to talk about the big amount of the total delivery. And that bottom picture there with my colleague, backing ordinary people doing extraordinary things, is going to be the theme. So we're a residential commercial property financing company, which really means we fund against the cash flow and the collateral of the property. And we fund in South Africa's cities. Inner cities was where we started, and in townships. And we aim to give commercially competitive returns to our shareholders with significant impact. To date, we've done nearly 67,000 units in the last 22 years. Founded in 2003, we're a non-bank financial services company, and all that means is we don't take deposits from the public. We raise our money on the capital markets. We're not a housing finance company. I want to emphasize this. We're not a housing finance company. We fund SMEs with a housing outcome. We're in the rental housing space. We fund on commercial viability and character. We spend a lot of time. By the way, I'll just mention, because I had some slides and I threw them out. We follow conventional best practice in underwriting of loans. We specialize in rental housing in suburban areas and in townships. Our products are standard mortgage products. We have some development finance products. That's where our developers sell to home loan buyers. We have the TUHF Equity Fund. We define affordable housing very loosely, because we find tight definitions is seldom useful. We fund mixed-use buildings. At 36 months is a mistake, but you know, where you have ground floor retail upstairs. And we do some student housing and associated commercial property, and our market niche is in urban areas. I'll come back to the point that urban form is important. And then our sweet spot is between 10 and 25 million rand, but we go up to 75 million rand. And for Kenyans, they're 7.5 shillings to a rand. And for people who like US dollars, it's not a currency I'm familiar with, they are 17.5 rand to the US dollar. So you can do your calcs. And we compete through specialization. And most importantly, we compete on proximity. So, and I've got this lovely story about a disaffected World Bank employee who wrote an article when I was a young professional called Pinstripes and Poverty. And if I've got time, I'll tell you the story at the end, if you want me to. So, who do we fund? Ordinary people. The extraordinary power of ordinary people. We have starters, we have medium and large multifamily and mixed-use property entrepreneurs. Your ability to speak English is not required to borrow money from us. And many people in South Africa, English is a third or fourth language. That you are educated is also not required. You have to know the area you want to invest well. You need to live and work in the area you want to invest, back to the power of local knowledge, and you need to be practical and hardworking. Like many financial institutions, we avoid politically connected people like the plague. Don't like them at all. We like them personally, but we don't like them as clients. The characteristics we look for is, are you entrepreneurial? Are you streetwise and down to earth? Are you hardworking and practical? And are you able to manage the realities of residential real estate, which has a big human resource or human interaction, and then technical? Okay, and we'll speak to you at any language, at any level, and that means South African languages. There are 11 of them. I'm going to skip through that. So this is a downtown Joburg hijacked building. That's what it was, that's what it ended up. By the way, it's edge rated. So I've been pushing the green boundary, and that's what it looks like on the inside. This was a downtown light industrial block that a policeman out of the Hillbrow police station did. This is a sectional title condominium type thing that we funded. That lady's name is Khomotso. She bought a house in Soweto, I think, Soweto, and what? Orlando, apologies. And she turned it into that. Now, we didn't choose the best. This is what our entrepreneurs do, and there are 12 units. There's a magic number, 12 or 18. I have no idea why we're always 12 or 18, but that's what we do. So why do we focus in cities where we can do urban densification and urban regeneration? So the most important thing is that major cities are multi-sector economies. And this is important because the tenants of our clients get their money from lots of different sectors. And therefore, the cash flows of the projects that we fund are very stable. There's a huge urbanization trend. We heard the Principal Secretary, and I thought his speech was great. We think that 70% of South Africans are already urbanized, and we have just maybe not 5% per annum, but a big urbanization trend. We think urban form matters for social reasons, for economic reasons, and importantly for fiscal reasons. In other words, what does the taxman think about all of this? Is it positive for him or is it negative for him? And then local economic development, this is where I perhaps don't agree with the Principal Secretary. I mean, our research shows that people who came to the inner city of Joburg without jobs, 50% of them are now living in our clients' buildings, and they are reasonably well off by South African standards because they came to an area where housing is part of the real economy. The big step that the African Union is taking forward is starting. You are developing SMEs and you're developing jobs as a result. So the reliable cash flows, the commercial resilience is high demand, reliable cash flows, urbanization's entrenched, etc. I'm going to go. One of the things I want to just stop on this is, that's our standard product. Two important points. We will not fund a project unless the financing to start and complete it is in place, and that the day after it's rented up, it has a debt service cover ratio of 1.3. So for every rand our client owns us, he got 30 cents in the back pocket. Because, well, you don't want, I've had it before. Paul, I think I'm working for you and I'm not enjoying it. I don't want that. So that's the important point. The second point I want to make, and the first of the controversial ones, is we lend at 3.5% above market rate. And the point I want to make quite strongly, I'll make it again, is this preoccupation with concessional rates is damaging us. It's something we need to get over. It's not helpful. And I'll come back to that point in a minute. So here's some pictures of our entrepreneurs. I've got a lovely story about the lady on the top in the middle who approached 3 banks with a sale, and it's a longer story, but she got turned down by reception at the banks. Can you imagine? Credit gets to reception. Anyway, we lent her 6 million rand. I can tell you that because she tells everybody. And there's some of the buildings that we finance. So the important thing about massive small is that this is where real delivery happens. So urban densification is an absolute prerequisite for increased economic and social action. If you develop on the periphery, you entrench poverty, you are fiscally net negative, you are economically net negative as a general rule. Here I agree with the Principal Secretary 100% again. If you develop in an urban form that's densified, that is using existing infrastructure, etc., you are fiscally net positive. In other words, the taxman is going to get more than he put in the public sector. Inclusive growth and urban transformation is a microeconomic concept. It happens at street level, it happens at neighborhood level, it happens at city block level. Scale of delivery in affordable housing is overwhelmingly by small and medium entrepreneurs. In South Africa, I think it's less than 25% to the big guys, the guys that we've been talking about, only talking about thus far today. 75, I put 30% because I just didn't want somebody come say, no, it's actually 28% or so. So the overwhelming majority of affordable housing delivery in South Africa is by the little guys. But we're not focusing on them. By the way, it seems to be the case in Kenya. Kenya seems to be, I mean, pipeline's one of the most impressive areas I've ever been to in my life because of the scale of small guys delivering. South Africa, I think, I haven't got there yet, is that we should have, as a national objective, 10,000 20-unit average projects per annum. That should be our objective. Urban densification, you can't get big pieces of land in urban areas. It's not possible. You can get it on the periphery. As we say in Zulu, the Klatin, out there in the rural areas. But you can't get it internally. So you have to do infill developments. Use physical, social, and administrative infrastructure, which is fiscally prudent. We really need to get over this large project mentality, the ribbon-cutting affair. How's my time, Beatrice? I've got another story, 2 stories I want to tell you. I'll get there. And then the biggest obstacle that we face in South Africa is the belief in the ordinary person. The average public servant and the average politician doesn't believe in our people, in spite of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. It is quite the most amazing thing. And the enabling environment, City of Cape Town's just passed enormous step forward in terms of bylaws, but allowing that the policy and practice, there's not this disconnect. So in South Africa, we have a huge urbanization, urban densification policy, but our practice is on the periphery. Why is this? So these are issues that we need to get through. So back to blended finance. So we have a blended finance partnership in the TUHF group of companies, and that's TUHF Limited, Umastandi, Intutugo. And and I'm talking particularly about a government program called the Jobs Fund. Jobs Fund 3, by the way, that's incorrect. I said 2011, it's 2015. It was an enterprise development. Of course, we only fund entrepreneurs. Came to the party. And we've managed to gear that with owner's equity. Remember, every entrepreneur puts their own money in. We've geared it with capital markets, international DFIs. Initially, Proparco, we've just signed a very large facility with the International Finance Corporation, with the commercial banks, local impact funds, philanthropic funds, notably the Oppenheimer Foundation and the Arrowhead Foundation. And we have raised match funding. And it's kind of an impressive list if you look at the numbers. The DMTN, which Sanlam, which is a big insurance company, and Future Growth, a big impact investor, 360 million. The Vuselelo warehouse funded by Standard Bank, 1.34 billion. TUHF Urban, our first securitization, 650 million. Urban Ubomi, 1.4. Urban Ubomi 2, 1.8, and so on. You can read it. And just the number of actors there. I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide, though. You know, sustainability and replicability are critical. Zanele Klatsayo from IFC has just nailed it. If that's not your objective, you really are funding till your concessionary funding runs out. And it runs out really quite quickly. So competitive market rate funding is what we need to solve. That's the solve. How do you make that work? It's not market rate, it's competitive. You know, you want to get it as low as possible, but it's investable. The second is that you need to have a pipeline of projects. You have a reputation and structures that can access the capital markets, because then the second thing is that your access to capital is theoretically limitless. You have no limit. You can do this again and again and again until, and obviously you're innovating. The third thing is that, and this is where massive small comes through, and the big projects don't have this, is diversification is critical. Funders don't like it where you're lending to a single sector or a single borrower. They don't like it. That's why in my next slide we'll try and, they like it when you've got a large spread of end users. And on TUHF's books, more or less, currently 25,000 leases, more or less. So if you can drill down to that, we've got this entrepreneur, his name is Mendel. He has 10 companies, and each company's got about 100 units in it. So that's 1,000 units. And when you securitize, and you've got Mendel, you are one. Then we got the rating agency to say, no, actually, let's drill down to, in an RMBS, a residential mortgage-backed security to his companies. Then we got 10 borrowers. Then we said, no, we're moving from residential mortgage-backed securitization to commercial mortgage-backed securitization. We drilled down to the leases. Now we've got 1,000. Makes all the difference in the way that you raise money. So you need to penetrate the counterparty concentration, and I've talked about those two things. Your legal architecture is absolutely critical. We use indemnity mortgages, which basically means that we have a mortgage listed in our deeds office, but they are ceded to a security SPV who can issue guarantees as and when required. And then you've got to avoid commingling of risk. I'm coming back to that. You can't have your borrower and your servicer and everything in the same. Capital markets don't like it. And then the structure and design is important. You know, there's been a lot about mismatch of tenors. We have a self-liquidating securitization because, you know, our average term is 15 years, but our average loan term, people pay us back, is about 8. So kind of work on that. And then the last is the law of institutional economics. Now, I'm an economist by training. And they have this lovely concept of transactions costs. Now, transactions costs is a function of the money, the time, the interactions you have, and the stress. You add that all, that's transaction costs. And what it says, in a nutshell, is that the more institutions you bring in, or people or organizations you bring in, the harder it becomes. But it's not straight line harder, it's exponentially harder. So if there are 2 of us, and the transaction cost is 2, if we bring a third, then the transaction cost is 4. If we bring a 4th person, the transaction cost is 16. And if we bring a 5th person, the transaction cost is 64 times bigger. That's more or less what it says. So you've got to be careful about keeping it simple, because the more people you have. This is a very interesting slide developed by my colleague AJ Rothman, who's now the new CEO of TUHF, which really just looks at what are the securitization risk profiles. So the first thing is, in a securitization, the servicer must be able to be replaced. And this is an example between TUHF, a standard residential mortgage-backed securitization, and then an installment sale, a vehicle funding thing. And in our RMBS, replacing the servicer, TUHF goes under, somebody else can take over and take over. The hedge provider, you know, we lend in prime, we borrow in JIBAR, Johannesburg Interbank. You know, you need a hedge, that's neither here nor there. And the bank accounts, doesn't matter if we're at Nedbank or doesn't really matter. We can switch, so there's no problem. Geographic concentration, people don't like concentration. That's one of TUHF's weaknesses. We're very geographically focused. Borrow concentration, we're trying to drill that with a commercial mortgage-backed. Sector concentration, we're very much in housing, in rental housing, not too big a risk. The product serviceability, the product complexity, and the performance. Getting down to, and sorry, those arrows have gone up a bit, so the last arrow should be down one, but the market standard terms, you know, in terms of the securitization, must be standard in the market. It can't be specific to you, so bespoke that the capital markets don't understand it. The complexity of the structure must be doable, and then the compatibility of the note offering, and there it is. I'm not going to, but essentially we have a sub-loan, that's what we put in using the sub-loan, and then there is the urban Ubomage capital stack with sort of MES right through to AAA local rates. And this is an affordable housing, guys. And it's an affordable housing not by a big fancy organization, by Mum Josephine, by Homotso. You remember those guys? That's there. That's what we're securitizing. Okay. These are sort of collection rates, and this through COVID performed unbelievably well. Outdid property sector, other property sectors very, very well. The big one I want to just, TUHF adopted capital covenants, even though we're not a bank. The important one is look at the leverage ratio, because that's where your money is made. You want 8.25% equity, and the rest must be borrowed from the capital markets. And then we raised some Tier 2 capital, which was also a first. I won't spend too much time on that. Now, it's very, very important if you claim to be an impact funder that you can measure. Because if you can't measure, you can't claim impact. And we have an extraordinarily good capability, my colleagues Lusanda and Catherine, to be able to measure. And essentially, I'm going to go to our theory of change first, and I'll come back. Our theory of change is critical to us. I'm not going to go through the activities and the outcomes, I'm just going to the outputs. I mean the impacts. Are we improving livelihoods? Are we making people have access to jobs, to businesses? Is there SME growth? And that's really about access to finance. And this adds to local economic development, where you are really getting inclusive growth from. The fiscal impact is critical to us. It must be good for government. In fact, in our studies, government is the one that gets the most, by the way. The highest return goes to the public sector, if you measure it over a 5 or 10-year period. Urban densification and urban land reform. By the way, urban land reform is a big issue in South Africa for obvious reasons. So here they are again, our kind of impact logic. The Sustainable Development Goals and our contribution towards that. So I want to start with my 2 stories. Have I got time, Beatrice? I don't. One story. So my one story, we were founded in 2003, and we had this little sort of launched with some sandwiches and some people. We had 71 million rand to lend, and we said, we're open for business. You notice we did 66,000, nearly 67,000 units. About the same time, there was a big development on the periphery of Johannesburg called Cosmo City was launched. And Cosmo City was launched with massive public subsidies. The president of the country arrived in his motorcade. The Minister of Human Settlements arrived in her motorcade. Oh, you know, this was like proper blue lights. And not to be outdone, the Mayor of Johannesburg arrived. So the Human Settlements, she arrived in hers, and he, the mayor, arrived in yet another one. And there was TV and ribbon cutting and stuff. Anyway, I looked online. Cosmo City's just got about between 30 and 35,000 units. We've done 67,000 units. Not a single cent of housing subsidy. Not 1 cent of housing subsidy in our thing. We're still waiting for the president. He hasn't arrived yet. So I just want to emphasize, we really need to spend a lot more time on the real engine of delivery. And that is the small and medium entrepreneur, the small and medium Kenyan, the small and medium entrepreneur in Mozambique, in South Africa, in all of our countries. We need to spend time on that. And guys, we've got to get away from this concessionary finance preoccupation. You use concessionary finance as a catalyst, as to lever, and to get the access. And then the last is that if you give the money to ordinary people, they will deliver above market quality at below market prices in a way that only they can, because they know the local knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Maybe you can take one pressing question.
One question.
Just one. Very pressing one.
Will you tell the second story?
That's not an option.
Thank you, Jackson, for that enlightening presentation. I just want to build up on the case of TUHF theory of change and flip it a bit to the side of affordable housing in general, like residential housing, and the whole aspect of livelihoods. From the PS presentation this morning, he highlighted a very important point, that people's income, there's very little we can do about it. So how are we thinking around the theory of change, linking livelihood to housing? I think, I just want your thoughts. We have always talked about it.
So the simple point is that if you build well-located housing through the right mechanism, in other words, using entrepreneurs, who when they want to fix something, aren't going to call, they know somebody who's a plumber, who's an electrician, who's going to be able to accommodate the person who wants to. You're creating economy, and thus you are lifting livelihoods. So I don't agree there's nothing we can do about incomes. There's a lot we can do about incomes if our public finance, that's government and the way it spends its money, directs to seeing the housing and housing development through the lens of the economy. It's a big breakthrough that we're making in the African Union. Housing is part of the real economy. It gives dignity. It gives a place where you can start developing businesses, seek employment, and if it's on the periphery, you're condemning people to poverty. So livelihoods is very, very important, that the investment in urban densification and urban form promotes local economic development, develops that area. So it's not a quick fix, it's a long fix, but it's a 5-year long fix. It's not a 50-year long fix if you do it properly. And our research backs that up again and again.